May 31st, 1985, 3:47 p.m. Steve Jobs walks out of Apple's headquarters in Cupertino for the last time as an employee. He's 30 years old. He co-founded this company 9 years ago in his parents' garage, and the board of directors just voted him out. Not fired technically, but stripped of all power, all authority, all meaning. He gets into his Mercedes and drives home, and when he arrives, he sits in his living room in complete silence for 3 hours. The company he built, the company he bled for, the company that has his name on every product, just told him he's done. But here's what nobody knew that afternoon. In exactly 12 years, Steve Jobs would return to Apple, and what he would do next would become the greatest comeback in business history. To understand how Jobs got fired, you have to understand what Apple was in 1985. The company had just launched the Macintosh a year earlier, January 1984. Jobs had poured everything into it, the design, the marketing, that iconic 1984 Super Bowl ad. He believed the Mac would change everything, and for a few months it looked like he was right. Sales were strong, the press loved it, Apple's stock was soaring. But then something happened that Jobs didn't predict. The Mac started failing. Not because it was bad, but because it was expensive. $2,495 when an IBM PC cost half that. Businesses weren't buying it, consumers weren't buying it, and by early 1985, Apple had warehouses full of unsold Macs. The board started panicking, and John Sculley, the CEO Jobs had personally recruited from Pepsi, was getting nervous. Jobs had famously convinced Sculley to join Apple by asking him, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley took the job, but now, 18 months later, he's wondering if he made a mistake, because Jobs is impossible to work with. Jobs screams at engineers, calls their work garbage, makes people cry in meetings. He divides Apple into two camps, the Mac team, which he calls artists and geniuses, and everyone else who he treats like they're stupid. The Apple that's two team, the product that's actually making all the money, hates him. In March 1985, Sculley goes to the board and says, "We have a problem. Steve is out of control. He's destroying morale. We're losing good people." The board asks, "What do you want to do?" Sculley says, "I want to remove him from the Mac division." The board agrees, but they tell Sculley, "You have to tell him yourself." So Sculley schedules a meeting with Jobs for May 24th, 1985. They meet in Sculley's office, and Sculley tells him, "Steve, the board and I have decided you need to step away from the Mac team." Jobs stares at him like he's been shot. He says, "You're serious," and Sculley nods. Jobs stands up and says, "You know what, John? You don't know how to run a company," and walks out. But Jobs isn't done fighting. He tries to organize a coup. He goes to board members privately and says Sculley has to go. The company needs me, not him. He even tries to get Mike Markkula, Apple's original investor and Jobs' mentor, to side with him. Markkula listens and then tells Jobs, "I'm sorry, Steve. But you're wrong. The company needs John right now. You're too volatile." Jobs feels the walls closing in, and on May 28th, the board meets without him. They vote unanimously to strip Jobs of all operational responsibilities. He can keep his title as chairman, but it's ceremonial, meaningless. 3 days later, Jobs walks out of that building. For the next few months, Jobs doesn't know what to do. He's worth over $200 million from Apple stock, but money doesn't matter to him. What matters is building things, and now he has nothing to build. He travels to Europe, he meets with Soviet officials about bringing computers to Russia, he even considers running for political office. But nothing fills the void, and then in September 1985, he makes a decision that will change everything. He's going to start a new computer company, and he's going to make it better than Apple. He calls it Next. Jobs recruits 5 key Apple engineers to join him, and Apple's board loses their minds. They sue Jobs for $300 million, claiming he stole trade secrets and employees. The lawsuit gets ugly, depositions, accusations, former friends turned enemies. Eventually they settle, but the message is clear. Apple wants nothing to do with Steve Jobs. Fine, Jobs thinks. I'll show them. He pours $12 million of his own money into Next and sets out to build the most advanced computer ever made. The Next computer launches in October 1988, 3 years in development. It's beautiful, it's powerful, It has a revolutionary operating system. There's just one problem. It costs $6,500. Nobody buys it, businesses don't want it, consumers can't afford it. Education institutions, which Jobs bet everything on, choose cheaper options. By 1990, Next has sold only 50,000 computers. Apple sold 50,000 Macs in a month back in 1984. Jobs is failing again, but this time, it's worse because this time, he can't blame anyone else. This is his company, his vision, his failure. Meanwhile, Apple is collapsing. After Jobs left, the company tried to move forward without him. They launched new products, hired new executives, made new partnerships. Nothing worked. The Mac's market share kept shrinking, Windows was dominating, Apple stock dropped from $60 in 1991 to $14 in 1997. The company was 90 days from bankruptcy. In December 1996, Apple's CEO Gil Amelio is desperate. The company needs a new operating system, and they need it fast because the current Mac OS is ancient and buggy. Amelio looks at two options: buy a company called B Inc. or buy Next. B Inc. wants $200 million, Next wants $400 million, but Next has something B doesn't have. It has Steve Jobs. Amelio knows Apple needs more than software. It needs vision. It needs someone who understands what Apple used to be. On December 20th, 1996, Apple announces it's buying Next for $429 million, and Steve Jobs is coming back as an advisor. Jobs walks into Apple's headquarters in January 1997 for the first time in 12 years, and what he sees horrifies him. The company is a mess. There are 15 different versions of the Macintosh. None of them are good. The product line is incomprehensible. The marketing is boring. The retail strategy is non-existent. He sits in on a product meeting and listens to executives talk about market share and profit margins. And he finally interrupts and says, "What are you doing? Where are the great products? What happened to changing the world?" The executives look at him like he's crazy. This isn't 1984 anymore, Steve. We have to be realistic. Jobs shakes his head and thinks this company is dead. But Amelio still believes he can save Apple without giving Jobs too much power, so he keeps Jobs in an advisory role and tries to fix things himself. It doesn't work. In June 1997, Apple announces a $708 million loss. The board panics, and on July 9, 1997, they fire Amelio. Now Apple has no CEO, the company is weeks from running out of cash, and everyone is looking at Steve Jobs. The board asks him, "Will you come back as interim CEO just until we find someone permanent?" Jobs says yes, but he has conditions. "I want complete control over products. I want to fire who I want. I want no interference." The board has no choice, they agree. September 16, 1997, Steve Jobs stands in front of Apple employees for the first time as the leader of the company he co-founded 21 years ago. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He tells them Apple is in terrible shape. "We're making too many products and most of them are crap. We've lost our way. We've forgotten what made Apple great in the first place." Then he puts up a slide, a simple 2x2 matrix. Consumer and pro on one axis, desktop and portable on the other. 4 categories, that's it. We're going to make 4 great products and kill everything else. The room goes silent because everyone knows what that means. Layoffs, cancellations, the end of projects people have worked on for years. Jobs doesn't care. Over the next 3 months, he cuts Apple's product line from 15 computers to 4. He cancels the Newton, which everyone thought was the future. He fires executives. He shuts down projects. 3,000 people lose their jobs, and Wall Street thinks he's insane. The stock drops even further. But Jobs is playing a different game. He's not trying to save Apple by doing what got them here. He's trying to reinvent what Apple is. In August 1998, Apple launches the iMac, a translucent blue computer that looks like it came from the future. Critics say it's too expensive, too weird. Nobody will buy a computer that looks like that. They're wrong. Apple sells 278,000 iMacs in the first 6 weeks. By the end of 1998, Apple is profitable for the first time in years. The stock starts climbing. The company goes from 90 days away from bankruptcy to posting a $309 million profit. But Jobs isn't satisfied because being profitable isn't the same as being great. He starts working on something new, something that has nothing to do with computers. In October 2001, Apple launches the iPod, a music player that holds 1,000 songs and costs $399. People laugh and say, why would anyone pay $399 for an MP3 player when you can buy one for 50 bucks? Obes doesn't care because he knows something they don't. It's not about the device, it's about the experience. 3 years later, Apple launches the iTunes Store, and suddenly the iPod isn't just a music player, it's an ecosystem. You can buy any song for 99 cents, sync it to your iPod instantly, carry your entire music library in your pocket. The record industry thinks Jobs is destroying music, but consumers don't care. They buy 70 million iPods in 5 years. Apple stock goes from $7 in 2003 to $80 in 2007. And everyone thinks this is the peak. This is as good as it gets. They're wrong because in January 2007, Jobs walks on stage at Macworld and says, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." He pulls out the iPhone and the world changes. Not immediately, but eventually everyone realizes what Jobs built. A computer in your pocket, a device that does everything. The thing that would define the next 20 years of technology. The iPhone launches in June 2007 and sells 6 million units in the first year. By 2010, it's 40 million units. By 2015, it's 231 million units. Apple becomes the most valuable company in the world. Jobs becomes a legend, and the people who voted him out in 1985 have to live with the fact that they fired the man who would have made them all billionaires. But here's the part of the story nobody talks about. Jobs didn't come back to Apple for revenge. He came back because he couldn't imagine a world without Apple. When he walked out in 1985, he was bitter, angry, convinced the company would fail without him. They didn't fail right away, but they lost something. They lost the belief that technology should be magical. Jobs spent 12 years in the wilderness learning how to be a better leader, learning patience, learning that vision without execution is just a dream. When he returned, he wasn't the same volatile 30-year-old who screamed at engineers. He was focused, disciplined, ruthless, yes, but in service of something bigger. The lesson isn't that Steve Jobs was a genius who saved Apple. The lesson is that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what matters. Jobs didn't save Apple by being smarter than everyone else. He saved it by caring more than anyone else. He cared about every pixel, every material, every detail that nobody else thought mattered. And in the end, that obsession, that refusal to settle, that belief that technology should make you feel something, that's what separated Apple from everyone else. May 31st, 1985. Steve Jobs walked out of Apple broken. September 16th, 1997, he walked back in ready. And between those two dates, the greatest comeback in business history was written, not with words, but with products that changed the world. Some people spend their lives trying to prove they were right. Jobs spent 12 years becoming right. And when he came back, he didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just got to work. Because in the end, that's what separates the bitter from the great. The great ones don't need vindication, they just need a chance to build.